so this is Bruce again. When I was talking about the fish that we might see at these depths, it reminds me that, it looks like we have the bottom in sight, so maybe I'll stop talking and let you chime in.
I think we're a little ways off yet, Bruce, so go ahead. Oh, there it is.
It's in the camera one. I see it.
There it is. All right.
Hello, Paul. This is Tutashi, Joe, and Moika from the Sanctuary Office, National Marine Sanctuary of American Samoa, calling in.
Fantastic. I'm really glad to hear you, and you're calling in at just the right time because we're just seeing the bottom here. So would you like to tell us a little bit about the sanctuary?
Yes. This is we diving in the one of our sites. This is a research site in an Aunu'u unit. One of the interests of this dive was for us to look at the connectivity between shallow and deep water, which we currently do not have any information on it. So I think any data collected from this dive will really help us from the management side.
Excuse me. Thank you, Tuatasi. That was Tuatasi Lele Po from the Sanctuary Office here, who's been working with us all week. And so these are the first images that we are ever seeing from the sanctuary at these depths, and we're just settling to the bottom at about 290 meters. What are we looking at, Del?
Yeah, it looks like we're pulled up right against a steep wall that we saw earlier. If those of you were looking at camera 3, that steep cliff face.
I see lots of like lineations and lines and grooves in this rock.
Yeah, it has very little rubber. It's very intact carbonate rock here.
And so what's a carbonate rock?
Carbonate rock would be formed in this place. It would be formed by a bunch of corals that have built through time. So if you were to go snorkeling here, it's a very popular activity on American Samoa. So you go out, you see all these beautiful corals. Well, through time, the islands are subsiding. The corals keep growing up towards the surface, following the sunlight, and we get this massive package here of carbonate material. Carbonate, calcium carbonate is the mineral these corals are growing from.
And since I also teach oceanography, I know subsiding means that it's sinking. So yes, the whole island is sinking into the ocean. And it's a race, I guess, between the corals growing to the surface and the island sinking down below.
That's right. The corals are growing, the islands are sinking, and sea level is going up and down. So it can be a really complicated story. In some places, we might see areas that look like they've been weathered away. We'd say it's karstic, like meaning caves, essentially. We don't really see that here yet. This looks fairly intact to me. If we did see that, it might be indication that this carbonate platform had actually been exposed above sea level at some point. Right now, though, this looks like fairly solid rock. I'm not sure about that groove pattern. If someone out there has an interpretation about that, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I was just wondering, so I can see some sediment dusting there, and they seem to be more concentrated in the bottom of those grooves, and I was wondering if that was little erosion channels or if that was back from when it was shallow water, you know, sort of spur and groove.
Yeah, you do see that in some reefs today. You see that spur and groove sort of texture. If we have any carbonate experts on the line who would like to chime in, perhaps.
For those of you at home, if you have a look at camera 2, you're going to see the camera view from the Sirius camera sled. That's the vehicle that is up above the D2, and you get just a spectacular view of how steep this cliff that we've been moving down is, and you can understand why the ROV approaches this area with some caution. And it's really quite an impressive feature.
Scott and Del, I think I'm seeing some fishing line that's running horizontally across the main camera there. I wonder if you could confirm that.
Yeah, I saw that, and I don't. I do see what you mean.
Yeah,
so,
I see it.
Video
navigator.
confirms it is fishing line.
Yeah, there's fishing line here.
Yeah, I think it's already been relayed. I wanted to make sure you guys knew that we thought we saw a fishing line running across the bottom here.
select ways.
That was one of our known hazards here in this area from when our dive plan. So something we expected to be on the lookout, but I'm glad you spotted that, Bruce.
Yeah, so I guess this is a worthwhile time to point out that we have a number of scientists who are on shore who are following along in this dive at their home institutions or in Exploration Command Centers, ECC, for example, at the University of Hawaii, at the NOAA Fisheries Lab in Hawaii, and at Harbor Branch in Florida. And it was one of them, I think Shirley Pomponi was the first to note. She's at the Harbor Branch ECC that there may be fishing line on the bottom, and a couple of other people noticed that and then relayed that information to us. And so this is just kind of a taste of telepresence where we have a number of different people in the community across the world who are tuned in, can make their own observations, relay that to us, and then we can act accordingly to those observations. In this case, we just want to be sure that that fishing line isn't up in the water so that it gets tangled on the ROV. And it looked like it was on the bottom, so we're fine there. But as we go forward, the next 3 weeks, we'll be diving for the next 20 days or so. Some of these observations will be of the different animals that we see and requests for close-ups and zooms. We'll have a number of geologists working with Dell to describe some of the features and so on that we see, suggestions for sampling and so on. In fact, I think I see a coral on the lower left. It's white, just going at a screen now. So we may have our first coral of the cruise. It looked like a little white fan. Nav, this is Watch Lead. Can you let me know if we're in operations mode now or if you guys are still settling out?
Yeah, watch it. I'll jump in on that. Nice, busy. We are settled in here. We were settled in a minute ago, but we saw that line, so we're just positioning ourselves away from that line, and then we'll safe place now to continue.
Copy that, pilot. Thank you.
Scott, we're good to go whenever. I'm just going to sidle up the cliff here as make our way to waypoint 2, unless you chime in otherwise.
Copy that, pilot. Thank you.
Yeah, as we get a little closer here, you can really see that it is sediment coming in, sort of filling that grooves, that lighter colored material working its way down off the platform. It would be carbonate material as well. So.
Yeah, so most of the sediment here would be sort of ground up coral and carbonate from higher up the slope.
Yeah, so if you've been to American Samoa or even Western Samoa, many of the rocks when you're walking around are black. Those are the
There's some more line on the left, on the upper left.
So yeah, many of the darker rocks you'll see, all the darker rocks you'll see in the islands are basalt, but around that is this platform of carbonate rock that's building up, and that's what makes the nice sand beaches that you see typically, and that finer material. Some of that's working its way out here to the margin of the platform.
It'll be interesting to compare when we get further north and we're working on the seamounts, what kinds of sediments that we see there, and compare it to these emergent reefs.
Yeah, so this same flat topography that we see here in the platform, we're going to see that on a number of seamounts we'll visit later in this expedition. Many cases it'll be thousands of meters below the sea surface there because the volcanoes will have subsided or sunk down that much. Here it's still very shallow because this island's fairly young. Probably started forming about 5 million years ago, and as recently as 500,000 years ago we probably had some eruptions here in Western Samoa.
So again, just to keep you informed here, we're moving cautiously up this wall, and more cautiously than perhaps normal, because we've seen in a couple of places fishing line lying across the bottom, and the last one that we saw was actually raised a few inches above the bottom. The system that you're looking at that are sending these video images to you is a dual body ROV system. ROV stands for remotely operated vehicle, and they are attached to the ship by a long cable, a tether. And so we don't want to put ourselves in a situation where those cables get entangled in any way with any fishing gear or line that's on the bottom. Exactly. So I'm starting to see some stuff on the bottom. I think there was just some, maybe some kelp. There's actually a yellowish object in the lower left corner. Yeah, so this may be a small coral fan. That is, yes, please. We're going to get a zoom on this. And I think the brown stuff that we saw that we passed may have been some algae that had sunk from the surface and got entangled on the rock. And so sure enough, this looks like our first sea fan, and maybe next to it is a black whip that would be the skeleton of a black coral. I can't tell if it's alive, but we'll wait till we look at this yellow thing. And we're zooming in here. I'm kind of intrigued as I look at this because I see a very dark skeleton underneath this yellow tissue. So I'm hesitating a little bit before I can determine if this is actually an Octa Coral or a black coral. And this is a black coral. That's very interesting. So a black coral is a coral. It has a proteinaceous skeleton instead of a stony skeleton like the stony corals that built this entire platform that we're diving on today. And it's called a black coral because it has a skeleton that is black in color, but the tissue that overlies that skeleton can be a number of different colors. This one happens to be yellow. And these are colonial organisms, which means that there are actually a number of individuals, all genetically identical, all that emerged from the same egg and larva, and that have reproduced to form this colony. And what you're seeing extending from the surface are the tentacles of those individuals. And so each one of them has a little mouth surrounded by 6 tentacles. So that's quite interesting. And they would capture their food from the water column. So just to the left pilot, there was a black unbranched whip. And so I believe what we're going to see is a second species of black coral, this one an unbranched one. And I wasn't able to see if there's any tissue on it.
So, Scott, I think this dive is rigged. The first 2 corals we see are a couple of the ones that you specialized in. I'm getting pretty suspicious here.
You notice they're attached to these little rocks. You think maybe I dropped them over just to make sure we saw them? No, I did not do that. That is a joke. Yeah, so this is a black coral skeleton, and I am seeing some tissue on there. It is alive. Basically, we're looking at the back side. You may have noticed on that yellow one that all those little tentacles seem to be facing in one direction towards the right. Well, here most of the tentacles are facing away from us, but as you see further up there on the left bottom side of the screen, it's kind of twisted, and so we see some very small tentacles. But sure enough, this is another black coral. I think there may have been a little anemone on it, and there was a little tiny sea star, a brittle star, not a sea star, excuse me, a brittle star on that black coral. So that's excellent. I'm also seeing a couple of polyps, cup corals. Little pink structures, one that just went off the screen down below. There we go. It's just coming onto the screen.
So Scott, would this coral have attached in the sediment, or you think it got buried there?
I believe this coral will be attached to the hard carbonate.
Rock.
Yeah, and there's just some sediment that's accumulated around the base.
Right.
It's a structure called a holdfast. There is at least one group of black corals that does have the ability to anchor itself in mud, but you wouldn't see those at these depths. It'd be much deeper. So this little orange thing that you're looking at is a stony coral. So this is related to those shallow reef corals that build up the entire reef. But this one is a solitary coral, so it doesn't form a colony. It's just a little cup. It appears to have I can't tell if the tentacles are retracted or it's just that they're so light that what you're seeing is you're kind of looking through it. The white lines that you see are actually part of the skeleton that the soft tissue is sitting on. So that's a really nice start. Let's resume our way up. We're trying to get up to 250 meters, and we'll move along at that contour. Nice little spot. 3 different kinds of corals in one little area.
But they may be buried soon.
Under the sediments.
Yeah.
Yeah. That may be the problem with the cup corals. Yeah.
That might not take much sediment before we wouldn't see them, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. The other thing you talked about before is the possibility for erosion. And so because these corals are attached to the bottom and are dependent on being fixed in one place in order to get their food out of the water column, if the base is eroding around them, they become dislodged. And unless they can sort of get stuck in just the perfect position, they will die. But it is possible for some of them to sort of reattach themselves
wow.
and continue to grow. We're just passing 281 meters depth. I believe we were on the bottom at about 290. Is that right?
Yeah, we're a little off the bottom. I don't think we ever quite made it all the way down.
I see. Okay, so I guess I should say we started our traverse to the wall and up. Yeah.
Right. We intended to hit the base, but we sort of ran into the wall, I think, at about 30 or 40 meters above.
Which is probably a good thing given the shortness of this dive.
Yeah, I think it'll work out fine for us because we do want to get up to 250.
So it's still relatively steep. It's not as steep as it was. Again, you can turn over once in a while to channel 2 and you'll be able to see the camera view from above to get a context of what is the greater environment that we're looking at close up with the main camera, camera 1, which is coming from the D2 ROV. There is a fish. I think there's maybe a tripod fish just coming in on the left side. It's a light whitish blue. So here I believe we have our first fish of the dive. And I'm going to pass this over to Bruce Mundy or Astrid Leitner, who are fish experts who are on the line.
I'm still waiting for it to appear on our video. I don't see it yet.
Yeah, we haven't zoomed in yet.
I couldn't see it.
I think I'm wrong. It's
This
not.
is a little too shallow.
Yeah, it's not a tripod, Bruce.
You know, this is too shallow for tripod fish. They tend to live deeper. This is one of the duckbill fish, I believe, but can't see if it has the yellow spots, and it's certainly not as prominent as the one species that we often see. So it's in the genus Crionema, family Percophidae. There's a common species that has bright gold spots or greenish gold spots on the body. This one has a little different color pattern. So I don't know what species this is, but the genus Crionema. And one of the things I was going to say at the beginning of this dive is we know so little about the deeper water fauna here in Samoa that a lot of the things that we'll see could well be new records, if not new species, for this area. So a duckbill fish in the genus Crionema, but not the Crionema chryseries that we see most often.
Terrific. Thank you, Bruce. You can also see a little...
So, Bruce, this is a really small one of these Crionemas, and I'm just wondering whether we could be looking at a juvenile, and maybe the difference is just juvenile coloration versus adult coloration?
That's a possibility, but we know so little about these deeper water fish that we can't really say, because I don't think there have been good descriptions about the changes, what they call the ontogenetic changes with growth and color pattern for these species. So at the moment, I think we'll just have to leave it. But you're right, Chris, that could be a possibility.
And for those of you on shore, you may have seen 2 red dots appear by that fish. Those are lasers that are being sent from the above the camera, and they give us scale. They're spaced 10 centimeters apart, so it allows us to get a sense of the size of things that we're seeing on the camera. So that fish was maybe 10 centimeters, but probably a little bit less than 10 centimeters. So probably the length of a good-sized hand. And I just want to invite Tuatasi or Marike or Joe, our collaborators from the sanctuary, if they're seeing, oh, there's a sea star coming up here, kind of orange right in the center. If you guys want to say anything about what you're seeing here in your sanctuary, please do chime in whenever you feel excited to do so. So we have a new phylum.
Thanks, guys. This has been really interesting so far, especially to get a first look at these depths. Just earlier this year, back in February, Dan Wagner, is formerly at Papahānaumokuākea Marine National Monument, is now with the NOAA Science Center out in South Carolina, was down here with Rich Pyle and who was doing some fish work. They were doing mesophotic dives down to 100 meters. Now, they were off the west side of Aunu'u and some of the areas in Whangalua, Whangamaha, but I know Dan's going to be very interested to see that black coral that you guys came across, because he had collected what he thought to be new records here in American Samoa and is doing the lab work on them now.
Great, thank you, Joe. What we're zoomed in on here now is a sea star, an echinoderm, phylum Echinodermata, and we may have some folks on shore who can give us more information. I kind of want to lean towards a family that has the name Porcelainastridae, but perhaps Chris Kelly will know more. We often have Chris Ma from the Smithsonian Institution joining us, and I'm not sure if he's with us today. It's pretty late on the east coast of the U.S., but I'm sure he will greatly appreciate these images. You can see it's kind of moving slightly. It's gliding ever so slowly, so these sea stars have tube feet underneath these arms, the 5 rays of arms, and at the tips of some of these arms you can sort of see some of those tube feet extending. And they, it's kind of like a centipede, you know, they use those tube feet to move along the bottom, and so it appears that they're kind of hovering or gliding across the bottom, and the mouth is pointed down towards the substrate. I don't know anything about the particular species we're looking at, so I don't know what it would be feeding on. It could be a scavenger. It could be looking for clams, mussels, and so on. Chris Kelly, you have any idea?
So Scott,
go ahead, Chris.
Scott, this is Chris at UH. So this is most likely going to be in the family Goniasteridae, and that's a pretty large family. And one of the things I was looking at, because we just met with Chris Ma a few weeks ago at the Smithsonian, and he was trying to educate me a little bit on these, is that you look for, among other things, whether or not the scales or the plates toward the ends of the arms are touching each other. And if they do touch before reaching the end of the arm, then that's one particular genus. And I was trying to look it up right now. It could be Astroceramus, but I don't have my notes in front of me, so I'm not certain. But definitely Goniasteridae is the family, I think.
Thank you, Chris. We're looking at a purple fish swimming here in the center of the screen, and we'll try to get a zoom on this. And so, fish biologists, feel free to chime in when you see it. It's a very small one. Kind of a beautiful neon purple.
Seems to be in a hurry now.
I'm also seeing a little bit of red, crusty stuff on the bottom, and I'm wondering if that is crustose red algae. It's pretty deep, but it's possible.
Hello, it's Chris Ma.
Chris, hi. Thanks for calling in. Just stand by for a second before you tell us about that sea star. We're looking at a couple of fish here, but we'll get right back to you. Bruce, Astrid, or anybody from... Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, this is Bruce. Sorry, I stepped out for just a moment and the fish appeared. These are fish called grappos, and they're in the family Coelanthiidae, which are called the splendid perches. The genus is Grammatinotus, and there are a number of species. That one looked like it had a diamond-shaped tail, which some of them have. A lot of the species are distinguished by the shape of the tail. Some of them are have filaments coming off the end. Others are diamond-shaped like this. They're quite beautiful, as you saw, purple, violet fish. Some of them have yellow or orange markings. Some of them are entirely orange. They're what they call a mesophotic fish. They live not at extreme depths, but at depths at which the sunlight is very dim, and we're getting up into those depths. We are in those depths, at the bottomfish depths. They're quite abundant. They are probably form of food. They're food for the larger groupers and snappers and the sharks that would come down to these depths. They're quite beautiful fish. If they were in shallower water, they'd be probably really popular as aquarium fish, but most of them live too deep to be collected by aquarium fish collectors. And new species of these keep being discovered. There was one described just a few months ago. So we don't really know as much about the taxonomy and species identity of these grappos as we should, but they're quite pretty fish. Genus Grammatinotus.
Thanks a lot, Bruce. We're just having a close-up look right now at another one of the whip-like black corals. So we saw earlier we couldn't see the tentacles as well, but here you can see them very, very clearly. You can see the black skeleton and then the transparent white tissue. And Chris, just one more second. I just want to give an opportunity for Del to say something here, because I see that the geology seems to be changing a little bit.
Yeah, it looks like things are a little cracked out. Maybe this block has slid, and you saw those fish make quick work of that crevice there to hide him when the ROV came. So we haven't seen a lot of habitat like this when we first started. This is really the first place we've seen instead of a crevice where a fish might seek refuge from a large ROV or other predators.
Great. So Chris Ma, thanks for calling in. So I guess you saw that sea star and were interested?
Yes. I congratulate Chris Kelly. He's learned well. It is, in fact, Goniasterid. And you were close. I think he had said Astroceramus. This looks more, to me, however, like another genus called Rosaster. And the reason I say that is because there's a single series of plates that continues from the disc all the way along the center of the arm. And there are only 2 or 3 genera of sea stars that do that. Think of sea stars as kind of those 3-dimensional puzzles, like those. They're like boxes of millions of little plates, like interlocking ossicles. And basically, the pattern of these plates is how you identify them. And with Goniasterids, it is all about sort of figuring out which pattern it is. That's why they all look alike. So this one looks like a relatively commonly encountered one called Rosaster, although I've never seen one alive. So that's really neat.
The one we're looking at now,
you mean? If we ever actually saw one feeding on something, or it could just be a scavenger and you've already seen it feeding. So I'm happy to be among the phyla first seen on your leg. So thank you very much.
Chris, don't hang up.
Chris, what are we seeing right now?
I'm still a little behind. So I don't. You guys, just from my perspective, you're just moving off the Antipatherian. So.
Well, keep watching. That's what we'll tell you.
I'll keep watching, and I'll stay on the line.
Chris Kelly, you think the pink patches we're seeing here are sponge-related or red algae-related, or neither? That's good, pilot.
I think it could be coral and algae, Scott, because we are at, I'm trying to read the depth here, it looks like 265 or something, and that's actually shallow enough to start to see coral and algae starting to appear.
Thanks, Chris. So again, we're trying to make some way up the slope here so we can get into the real bottom fish depths. But we're seeing some interesting coral and echinoderms as we move up the slope here. And Chris was, and I agree, suggesting that this might be coral and red algae. So red algae are related to plants. They can photosynthesize, and there's a whole group of them that can deposit calcium carbonate into their cell walls. And so they have a very crustose appearance, and they can grow as these patches over the bottom. And they have pigments in their cells that allows them to use the only wavelengths of light that actually get down to this deep. Most of the other wavelengths of light are scattered and absorbed much more shallow regions, which is why you don't see plants and seaweed and algae typically in any of our deep sea dives, but we're just at that limit, so that might be what we were looking at there. We also had a note from Ken. Oh, go ahead, Chris. Yep.
Oh no, I was just going to point out that I've now seen the starfish that you were seeing a few minutes ago. Did you need to continue your narrative?
No, please go ahead. This is a really good time for you to tell us about it.
So the sea star that you're looking at, or that we were looking at, that was at the base of that black coral. That is what's in the genus Nepantia, Nepanthia. It's a member of the family Asterinidae. This is a widespread kind of bunch of sea stars that is related to, if you're from the West Coast, bat stars, or if you're familiar with those little sea stars that live in your aquarium that come in with the rock. It's the same family, except they're kind of bigger and more filled out, as you were. They're awfully hard to tell from pictures, and I'll need to sort of give it some homework. But they're commonly encountered in the Mesophotic zone down to the sort of upper continental shelf depth. So between maybe 50 to 500 meters, and no one knows much about them. So that one was surprisingly colorful. So thank you.
Thank you, Chris. We're just having a quick look at these branching structures. They look like branching stony corals to me, but I'm not sure that they're alive. I also see there's a red branching object on the far right side of the screen. Well, maybe it is alive. So what is this? I think, well, I was going to say I think that this is a hydrocoral, but now I'm not so certain seeing the tentacles on the left side there. So we're in depths that I am really not very familiar with, so I won't be able to identify many of these corals today. There is a sort of a pinkish red one on the right side of your screen. That is possibly also a hydrocoral. So a hydrocoral is another type of coral. It's in a group that's different from the stony corals and the black corals that we saw. That they form these calcareous skeletons. So you can see that the skeleton is looks very stony. You know, it's very rigid. It isn't moving in the current or anything like that. You can see there's a very regular pattern of the way that the polyps are emerging from it. There are these little volcanoes. It's a good theme to use, yeah. And you can see there's some little rings of tentacles that are coming out of the tips of those volcanoes, but it's too small to be able to determine what it is. The size of it and the size of the polyps does make me think that it's a hydrozoan hydrocoral. And common names for hydrocorals, not this one, but if you've heard of fire corals or lace corals, those are examples of hydrocorals. I have no idea what kind that would be.
Did we want to try to see that red thing that was off to the side there? I've lost track of it now.
No, that's okay.
That's good.
Yep.
Thanks, fine.
Huh. Oh, that's sediment, I guess, that white in that crack. I thought it was staining, but I guess it's some sediments in there. Sometimes we see different organisms, octopus and stuff, kind of tucked away into cracks and crevices. And earlier we were zoomed in on, perhaps it was the first sea star that we saw. When we went in, it was near a crack. I noticed a tube of some kind retract, and I believe it may have been a siphon of some kind of clam or a mussel or something. You can still see some of this pink shading on the bottom, which is the which we're hypothesizing may be crustose red algae. One of our scientists on shore had written in a little bit earlier. This is Ken Sulak, who's in Florida. There's another black coral, that wire coral that you're seeing sticking up in the center of the screen. He had written in, he's an expert on deep sea fish, that the fish that Bruce Mundy was describing, that one that had the green patches on it, that the eyes, you can see that the eyes are really large, and this is typical of the fish that live in this, what we call the twilight zone or the mesophotic zone, this transition between where there's sunlight and where there isn't. Is that a fish that's on? No, that's another black coral that's sticking up. I can see now there's several black corals in a row here, 1, 2, 3, 4, on the right side of the screen. And actually, the one that's on the left pilot, if we could have a look at this one, the polyps are too large to be a black coral. This is something different. So this whip, thank you. So we'll have a quick look at this. One of the things that you will see if you stay tuned to our various dives over the next few weeks, there's a lot of different kind of coral, and we'll be using this terminology like polyps. I'll do a better job describing exactly what polyps are as we go forward. But one of the ways that we identify these different kinds of corals is by the shape and size of the polyps, the number of tentacles they have, whether there are side branches on the tentacles, and a number of other features. And one of the beauties of this ROV system is that we get this stunning imagery of very, very, very small things, and we can see the characters. Wow. Wow, I just got to stop right there. Okay. So at first I thought those were rings of tentacles, but I'm thinking perhaps they're spines. And if that's the case, this may be an Octa Coral in the genus called... Oh, no, those are anemones because they have tentacles that are going up and down in the same ring. So this is either, I'm going to put a guess out there, and if anybody has a better guess on shore, please let me know, that this is either a whole lot of anemones growing together or it's a zoanthid of some kind. But it is definitely not an Octa Coral. It is not a black coral. And one of the ways I can be so assured of that is you see, I think those are tentacles. It's kind of embarrassing that I can't even say that. But all those little finger-like projections, there are no little side branches coming off them. The polyps are way too big to be black corals. So I'm seeing, some folks on shore are agreeing that this is likely a zoanthid. And so what is a zoanthid? There's really no common name for the group Zoanthidia. They are kind of poorly known, but the best comparison is a sea anemone, and you've likely seen sea anemones in aquaria. And it's a sea anemone that can undergo budding to divide a new individual, but they remain connected to one another. And they continue to do that, and then they can form these colonies. And very often what they're doing is overgrowing pre-existing skeletons. And you may have heard of the gold coral, which is a precious fishery resource. The gold coral is a kind of zoanthid that begins life by overgrowing another kind of coral and then produces its own skeleton. Now, I do not believe that that is a gold coral, but it is a zoanthid, I think. And it maybe it's overgrowing a black coral or something. So that's a really interesting observation. Steve Oskevich, who is one of the biology leads on the last ROV leg, has joined us in the chat room, and he also believes it's a zoanthid, but he thinks that the growth pattern of what it's growing on is really interesting. You can see it's kind of zigzagging back and forth, and we haven't seen anything else that's zigzagging like that, so we're not sure what it's overgrowing. And
yeah, I'd say Astra just pointed out there's a cup coral there to the right, looks like.
Yeah, it looks like there's a series of cup corals that are growing just to the right of this zoanthid. So those would be solitary individual corals, and there's another one, an orange one, up at the top left. I see Asako Matsumoto, who is an Octa Coral specialist from Japan, was asking, is it possible Parasitidae? And I'm not sure if she was referring to this one or to a previous Octa Coral that we've seen, but this is not Parasitidae, but it may have been earlier on. Oh, is that there's a shrimp, there's a crustacean of some kind also, just to the the bottom of the screen to the right of the colony. Yep, looks like maybe it's a shrimp of some kind. It's got some banded legs, red and white. And it looks like it's sticking out of a tube or a little burrow in the bottom.
Oh, yeah.
And this is one of the interesting things of being able to look with these cameras and all these nooks and crannies. There's so many different organisms. The biodiversity is in part structured by the complexity of the bottom. The more rough bottom you have, the more hidey holes and tree-like corals that are growing up, the more things can settle on those or hide in the holes.
Too. I don't do the whole category.
Chris, your microphone's on. Chris Kelly.
Yeah, you can see a...
Sorry, Scott. I had the mic on. Apologize.
No problem.
I think that shrimp, or what you call the shrimp, was actually a squat lobster in the genus Babamunida in the family Munididae. It's got characterized by those candy cane striped claws that were very elongate.
Great, thank you, Chris. It's also maybe, is that a blue or purple fish there on the right?
Are we trying to meet 250 meters in the nose, or is there something we're looking for specifically?
We want to get to approximately that depth range to look for fish that are associated at that depth and shallower. So it's, you know, it doesn't have to be 250 exactly, but we want to get above the deeper depths and then just kind of roam around up there.
Okay. I just didn't know if we were looking for a specific...
Bruce, did you see those large fish that just swam through from the upper left? I think they could have been brahmids, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, we could...
I saw them, but I couldn't get a look. I couldn't see if they were brahmids or if they were Seriola, amberjack. They went too fast. They were really zipping by.
They were sort of...
They were too short and deep-bodied for Seriola, Bruce, but Astrid has some comments here, too.
No, I disagree with Chris. I think they were too deep-bodied to be Seriola.
They may come back in a view.
Okay, well, they could be.
They were
Eumagistus.
They were hanging out. They were hanging out on one of the other camera views for a while.
The fish?
The fish were, okay. Yeah. Mike White had pointed them out, so perhaps we'll see them again.
Yeah, Annie White, one of the video team, just played a replay for me, and I saw that fairly large fish swim by. And you know, I don't know my fish, but it was kind of the shape of a tang, I thought, as it went up the slope.
Yeah, the tang shape would be roughly equivalent, not the same, but close to the brahmids, which are called pomfrets. They're also called manchong in Hawaii. There's more fishing line, by the way, on the bottom there that I see on the upper right. So that's also a commercially important fish, the manchong or the brahmids. There's a genus called Eumagistus. That's a possibility. There's another genus, Pteractictes, that has a longer forked tail. That's a possibility, too. But again, I didn't see them, so I can't say for sure.
Well, we'll have some, maybe we'll have some images of them, Bruce, that we can check out after the dive. And I'm seeing another black coral, perhaps, that we just passed over. And we're at about 247 meters depth, so about the range that we're trying to get up to. And there's a fish in the center of the screen, striped. So all you fish folks, it looks like it's in a little bit of a cave here, or an eroded overhang, underhang.
Yeah, the way these reefs grow, we tend to get more habitat, perhaps than we would with other kinds of rocks. And these reefs, when they get buried later, become big, very economically imported as traps for hydrocarbons and things like that. So
I'm also, as you're looking at the fish, I see that there's a ring of things. Go ahead, Bruce.
This is a grouper in the genus Cephalophilus. It's a different genus than we've seen before, and the species name is a Japanese name that I can't remember off the top of my head, but I'll look it up and put that into the chat log. But that's a small grouper species, quite colorful.
Thank you, Bruce. And you can see it's swimming behind all these shrimp, and that little cave that it came out of, I also saw lots and lots of these shrimp. I thought they were structures attached to the bottom and waving, but it turns out that they're these guys. See very thin legs, very long and thin legs, long antennae that they use to probe their environment. Oh, I also see, I think, a stoloniferous octocoral growing here. And that means it's an octocoral that grows like a ribbon. So it's a coral that instead of forming a skeleton, its tissue is a ribbon along the surface. So you can see these whitish tubes that are emerging from the rock pointed towards the left side. I believe that's what those are. Oh, and there's another. Well, that doesn't look. Well.
Okay, these are a type of snapper. They're in a genus Paracesio, and I'll have to look up the species. It could take me a little time to get that. I put the name of the grouper into the chat room and also into the event log. I think there's a Paracesio sordidus, and there's another one that has this type of pattern. I'm not familiar with these because they don't occur in Hawaii. I did see them on a submersible dive at Rose Atoll a long time ago, but that's embarrassing. That was probably a couple of decades ago, so I'll have to look that up.
Thank you, Bruce. That's the voice of Bruce Mundy. He's at NOAA Fisheries in Honolulu, and he is participating today from the Exploration Command Center on Ford Island. Nav, this is watch lead, but I can just barely hear you. Not really?
So, Scott, there's a larger coral colony to the upper right. I wonder if they could take a quick look at that.
So we're going to have a close look at this coral. I also see there's something blue at its base. And I was just informed by the navigator, unfortunately due to all the logistical problems that we were fighting today, as he said, it's going to be a pretty short dive. We only have about 30 minutes of bottom time. Okay, so this is going to be an Octa Coral, a sea fan. You've heard the general term sea fan. This is a classic sea fan here. And I see in its arms is a brittle star, and there's also a sea spider, I believe, walking across the back side there. Maybe we can just get a zoom on the sea spider before we move any further. Thank you. That is not a sea spider. It's interesting. Right now, all I can say is it's not a sea spider. It's an arthropod of some kind, and I'm not sure if it's some kind of crab or some kind of isopod. You would have to see a little bit more detail about the abdomen. It looks to me like the abdomen was kind of flexed underneath the body, which is characteristic of squat lobsters. But I don't believe I've ever seen squat lobsters that have legs quite that long. And it's walking on this sea fan, as I said. That's a member of the phylum Cnidaria. And the Cnidarians are broken up into a number of major groups, one of which is the Anthozoa, and that's where you find all the different kinds of stony corals, black corals, and then the Octa corals. And within the group Octa Coralia, there's a lot of diversity. And so I'm wondering if this is going to be something in the genus Paraceus or something close to it, and I'm saying that based on the thickness of the branches and the appearance of the tissue. Okay. Well, based on what I'm seeing of those antennae, this has got to be some kind of decapod, I would think. Steve Oskevich is wondering if it's maybe an arrow crab. So Really interesting. And while we're zoomed in here, you can see this nice view of the polyps, the yellow polyps of this octocoral with their tentacles. And this, if you were looking earlier, we saw some tentacles that were really smooth. This one you see has these little projections coming out the side. Those are called pinnules, and that's the hallmark of octocoral polyps. And another thing you might be able to see, the white backside of this colony that's kind of smooth, it almost looks like it's a bunch of paving stones put together. And those structures are called sclerites. They're made of calcium carbonate, and they help support the overall skeleton. And the size of those paving stone-like sclerites is why I suggested this might be in the genus Parasus or something very closely related to it. There you just saw the leg of this crab hit one of the polyps, and it retracted its tentacles, and now they're opening up. And there's this little whitish yellow spot right in the center of the tentacles. That's the mouth. And so the gut is obviously inside, and the gut of all of these things, all of these individual polyps, is interconnected with one another. There's a second shrimp that appears to me, it's a different kind of shrimp, and it has eggs that was on the right side of this colony. So that's great. Thank you, pilot. It's a nice observation.
So these other animals are using this sea fan here as habitat then, huh? So.
Exactly, exactly. So we refer to these sorts of animals as creating habitat structure. And especially, well, the coral itself is a suspension feeder. And so all of those polyps with their tentacles are trying to grab food from the water column. And so that food is going to be drifting by periodically. And so the faster the currents, the more food is going to be drifting by. And so it's a good idea to try to get up into those faster currents. And the further you get away from the bottom, the faster the currents are in general. And theoretically, you know, they'd be zero at the bottom. So any other animal that is also looking to get stuff out of the water column would be to its advantage to climb up onto these corals. We'll see sponges do that as well and take advantage. But we also saw a couple of what are called brittle stars or snake stars, and they had their arms tightly wrapped around. They're probably feeding either on the mucus that's being secreted by the colony or on other little bits and pieces of food that are getting stuck as the water flows past them.
I see.
We have a number of scientists who are involved here in the chat room who are interested in all these what we call associates of the corals. And as you suggested, if you have this sort of habitat structure, it provides a different kind of habitat for other organisms. So it increases the biodiversity of the overall area. If you didn't have these corals, you might not have some of the associates, especially the ones that are very dependent on the particular species that it's growing on.
Just got we're about just about 240 meters.
Copy that, pilot. And we had left it optional. That is correct. And we had left it optional to go to the west or the east, depending on how the conditions were best for you to operate.
Okay. So we're going to see what's best. And we're ready.
We are definitely ready. So we're going to begin our horizontal movement now. We've gotten up to about 240 meters, 239.5 meters to be exact. The water temperature is still really high. It apparently is about 19.6 degrees Celsius, so that's very warm. And we're going to move along here. We've seen 3 or 4 species of fish, and we're going to see if we can see more of these fish and other species of fish that are using this particular area. Pilot, let me just say, and obviously you saw it yourself, that the fish seem to like to use those little cave-like features. So if you see some features like that, feel free to move in on them yourself.
Okay. Yeah, I'll keep an eye out for the caves. There's one below us is illuminated.
Yep, copy that. I think that is more line. Shadow. Pilot, there's something pink, almost in the center of the screen, just to the right, excuse me, bottom center. Yeah, right below the lasers now. If we can just... Oh, is it on the line? Okay. Just a quick zoom. Understood. Oh, this looks like it is a crinoid living on a black coral. So a crinoid, is that a crinoid? No. This is a sea star, actually.
I think it's a sea star.
Yep.
Scott, could be Brazingid.
Yep, it absolutely is a sea star. So they're both related, the crinoids and the sea stars. They're all echinoderms, so they have tube feet. And one of the difference, well, I'm not going to talk about what a crinoid is now because we're looking at the sea star. You can see it's got many more than 5 arms. And I suspect we will hear again from Chris Ma. That was Chris Kelly who heard just a second ago, and he suggested it might be a Brasingid. That's the name of a family, the Brasingidae, which are a group of sea stars that actually put their arms up into the water in order to capture food particles, whereas most other sea stars, you know, are moving along the bottom and feeding. And so this is a great example, Del, of what we were just talking about, because this is a suspension feeder, so it's kind of climbed up onto this black coral to get itself higher off the bottom. What I've learned from Chris Ma is that the thick spines that you see there, he describes them, or it's been written in a paper and he's relayed this information, that the spines are almost covered in socks, and the socks are like Velcro. They have a whole bunch of hooks with them, and they can snag small crustaceans out of the water, and then those are transferred to the mouth for feeding. So we're at 239 meters, and we're moving in a basically a westward direction along this depth contour. And I think all of you can see running along the screen from about the mid-right side to the upper center, there is a line, which is possibly a discarded fishing line, and so we just want to avoid that. I can see another one of these fan corals in the center ahead. Looks yellowish to brownish in color, a sea fan. There's also another black coral below that. Looks like, I don't know if it's our distance, but the sediment color looks a little bit different. Or the something about the texture.
There's definitely fewer of those lines, a little more distributed. Yeah, it has to do with the spacing of the little holes in the rock here, I guess.
Chris Ma.
Hi, Chris. Just
Hey,
give me just a
are
second.
you past the Brasingid?
Yeah, we are past the Brasingid. We're moving a little bit quickly today because we have so little time, but I'll give you a second to chat about it in just a moment. I just want to point out that there were 5 or 6 or 7 of these wire-like coils, and these are all, again, black coral colonies. We had a close look at one earlier. So yeah, was that a Brasingid sea star, Chris?
Yes, and in fact, it made me very excited because that is Brasingaster. That's sort of a shallow water Brasingid. You saw there was one of these that you imaged on the last day of Santiago's dive, and I think they collected it. I've seen lots of those further south, and I've seen them in Japan, but this is the first time that I've heard of them occurring in this area. So I'm really enthused because they're really beautiful animals, but these are also they're shallow water Brasingids. There are places in South Africa where you can literally see these with rebreathers if you're diving there. You know, so they can occur at sort of lower end Mesophotic, upper end like 100 to 300 meter depth. I'm not sure yet if this is the same species that occurs near New Caledonia and Mauritius, but they're sort of more intermediate in morphology between sort of shallow water sea stars and Brisinghids in the classic sense. So seeing them alive is really lovely, and seeing them on substratum, and it's interesting because I noticed that black coral was a little denuded. A lot of the polyps were gone, and I've been having a sort of negotiation with people about whether or not the Brisinghids are actually feeding on those polyps, or if they just take advantage of the denuded sort of condition when it happens. So anyway, that's my blurb, and I'm sure we'll see another one again. So thank you.
Thanks, Chris. That was terrific. I was really kind of surprised when Chris Kelly suggested it was a Brisingid, because I'm used to those being really quite deep, 1,000 meters and thousands of meters, and not up in this depth range.
Yeah.
So it's quite interesting to see that they're
Believe
also
it or
up here.
not, they can occur very shallow, but they have to be in the tropics. So that's a treat, to be sure. I think the first time we've seen those alive was the Santiago's dive, from this area. The Japanese have seen them, but I don't think that they've really sort of publicized it, or it hasn't been in the it's not in the literature quite yet. Their name for it is actually Demon's Head Sea Star. It's kind of cool. Burning Wheel Demon's Head Sea Star or something like that.
Yeah, that's great.
Anyway, no, it's really exciting to see those, and I hope we see many more.
Chris, do you know, has there been enough work done on this group to know if that's a whole separate evolutionary group from the Brisingids, or is it multiple independent?
I kind of made the case that it was. They're more closely related, I think, to the sort of other forcipulates, like sea stars that are related to, for example, like Pisaster, or so these are sea stars that have little claws. And so things like the common sea star you see on the east coast, Asterius, or the sea stars on the west coast, Pisaster. And these show characteristics of shallow water sea stars. So they have papula, they actually have gills. If you look at Phragelids, the ones that you see at like 5,000 meters, they actually have no gills to speak of. They're all plates. The body wall is much thinner. And these are actually kind of almost fleshy. So, and they actually have color, other than Novidinia, which is basically orange. This is one of the few sea stars that is actually kind of red and displays like a more than one color. So there's a lot of cool things about them, and so like I said, seeing them alive is really something. To me, this is the coelacanth. That's how exciting it is.
That's great. That's a good comparison. The coelacanth being I think they're related to the lungfish, but the fish that people thought was extinct and showed a nice transition to legged mammals. Great. Thank you, Chris.
Definitely. I could go on, but these Brisingids show a lot of differences from what I would call your standard Brisingid, the one that you would see, at depth. And there are some really spectacular images that the South Africans have of having seen these, in really shallow water, and it's just astonishing. So
I'm glad we were able to get a close look at it.
I'll let you get to it, but thank you for stopping and taking imagery of that.
Thank you. So that was Chris Mott, the Smithsonian Institution. Nav, this is Watch Lead. Can you give me one more update on the off-bottom time? And this time I will make sure I pay attention to what the clock says too. Copy that, thank you. So we have about 11 more minutes to move around the bottom here, and hope we see some fish swim by and regale us with their presence. Boy, this is a really steep feature, so I'd like to hear from some of the fisheries folks about how they think fish associate with a steep wall like this. I would have expected you need more of a ledge or something to be on.
Well, I think Chris is more qualified to speak to that than I am, but this type of habitat is not really favorable for fishes, both the large ones and the small ones. The small ones would need some deeper holes and undercut ledges, which they can really get in and hide. And this is, as you can see, it's very barren. There's not a lot of food for the larger fish, or even the smaller ones for that matter. So we would see the commercially important bottom fish, I think, on a more flat type of terrain, probably with more ledges and crevices, definitely with more ledges and crevices in which to hide from the even bigger predators like sharks and jacks, but also that would support smaller fish, smaller animals like the squat lobsters that would form the food for the bottom fish, the larger fish. I do see a little fish coming down slope to the center of the screen in that groove in the center. It might have been a squat lobster, but
it was a fish, Bruce. We're zooming in now.
Habitat.
We're zooming into it now, Chris. Yep, there you go. I said Chris. I meant Bruce. Apologies.
Now, these are little basslets in the family Ceranidae. They're in the genus Plectrantheus, and there are maybe 50 species, 40 or 50 species in this genus. These have a different color pattern than what we've seen before, so I'm not sure what we're looking at. We're in the mesophotic area, the area of dim light, and we're deeper than people dive with the rebreathers that were mentioned earlier, but nevertheless it might be a species that people see in more shallow water on rebreather dives with mixed gas, so maybe somebody on Facebook or elsewhere can chime in. But these are little basslets in the genus Plectrantheus.
Thank you. And
yeah, and Bruce, there was the tail of one of your Cephalopolus that's down the groove just below these guys as well that was sticking out.
Chris, what's a Cephalopolus?
I'm sorry, that was a type of grouper.
Okay.
I saw it a minute ago. I think he went all the way into the hole. You could just see his tail sticking out at one moment. I think that's what it was.
Okay. And Chris or Shirley, do we think that the white thing is a sponge?
Yes, I think it is. I think it's a demo sponge.
Thank you, Shirley. So we've seen a couple of sponges, this white one, and then we've been seeing this bluish-purple smaller mass that we believe is also a sponge. And there's actually...
Yeah, I've been recording them. I've been logging them in. I think there are little patches of demo sponges as well.
I think there's more coral on this wall than I would have expected. By coral, I mean a lot of sea fans and the black corals, and even, we saw earlier a number of the cup corals. And given how I can imagine that sediments would tumble down here and the erosion, I'm a little bit surprised. A lot of them are fine, but, there were a number of those large yellow fans.
Well, some of them seem to be actually catching the sediment there and suspending it on the wall for a while. So.
Right, yeah, so I think the depth constraint is more operational than our desire. I think that, the sanctuary people would love to see a little bit shallower, but... yeah, I think that would be terrific. I think that's a terrific idea, pilot, if you can make that happen. You can see in this furrow, which I imagine, you think that's a crack, or do you think that's
I'm beginning to think that's an erosional thing. You can see that the sediment's coming over the slope. Most of the sediment we're seeing is quite fine, so you can imagine it being moved by currents up on the platform out towards the edge and sort of spills over. And all over, well, we'll see some great examples of this later when we get up in the Palmyra. We see these, submarine channels out in the middle of the seafloor. These may be little groove structures that are formed as the sediment sort of spills over. They've sort of organized themselves like this, and they seem to create some habitat. So yeah, it's pretty interesting. I hadn't quite seen anything like this before, but
I noticed in that last groove that there were 5 or 6 of those white globular things that we thought might be sponges, and I was wondering if they had tumbled down or if they're actually growing in that groove because maybe there's some water funneled in there.
Yeah, that could be. I mean, it seems like they were getting buried upslope by sediment once they're established there, which I wouldn't think would be desirable.
That is not a good thing for a sponge.
So they're not going to be rollers that tumble down. They would have had to. They'd have to be attached. They'd be falling off. I don't think they're anything that kind of rolled down and got stuck in there. I think there are quite a few of them as well. It's actually quite interesting to see them.
Okay, so Shirley, and when I said that, I meant that they were dead and had rolled down. So you believe that they're alive and growing in that position?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Yes, I do.
So, given what Del said, that's kind of interesting because you might think that that's a bad spot to be if the sediments are coming down and lying on top of the sponge, but I suppose it's possible that if it moves fast enough through the erosional channel, it actually
kind of bypasses you, or
or blows it off or something.
Shirley, do you think that's the desirable place for them to attach? Then they attach out to the walls there.
Well, I mean, in fact, Deb was just saying it may be that they're not actually, active grooves right now. They could be relic grooves, but if it's an area where, for example, things are filtering down, sponges are filter feeders too. But I mean, I think if there were like strong currents, no, they wouldn't be able to settle and grow there. But it just seems odd that that there are a lot of them that have accumulated there. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, I did notice that when we were deeper. It seems like when we got up to 250 is when I started to notice those, but.
I'm just excited to see demo sponges instead of just hexactinellids.
Yeah, when we dive a lot deeper, we often see hexactinellids. These are the so-called glass sponges, which have this just magnificently beautiful architecture. And I think we see fewer demo sponges than glass sponges at great depths. I'm talking about below 1,000 meters and 2,000 meters, and we will certainly see lots of those in the next few weeks. So yeah, it's nice to see a different kind of sponge. So I don't remember who said it earlier. I think the word barren was used, and it does look like there's relatively little here. But in fact, whenever we go in, there's actually a fair amount of stuff. Pilot, if we could we just get one more look at these sponges, the white balls in the groove? Thank you. So there's a number of different things growing there, crawling around in nooks and crannies, and so it's perhaps premature to refer to it as barren. It's not as obviously dense with animals because they're not all large and so on, and maybe that has to do with the amount of material that's moving down the slope, but there's certainly stuff here. Oh, great. Huh. I'm seeing these
those are definitely demo sponges. It's really...
Is that sediment on top of the sponges?
Yeah, sediment on top of the... Yeah, we're all excited back here.
Yeah, one person talking at a time.
So it is active. And there's totally sediment rolling down.
Yeah. Right, there's sediment rolling down on top. It looks like there might be worm tubes in there. These could be sponges called Spongoceroides.
Great, thank you, Shirley. Yeah,
they're bright yellow.
Oh, and there's a little hermit crab right here on the top of the screen. You can see it carrying its little, I'm going to use the term turret, but it's got that little twisted top hat shell.
Yeah, when you get in and look at it like this, you can see there are holes there. There are habitat.
Sure.
Not something that would support big fish right here, but plenty of spaces for other things.
And you can see how coarse this white broken up sediment is that's being deposited on top of these sponges. sponges are creating little ledges.
Yeah, the finer stuff might be able to move past more easily, right? So you sort of accumulate the heavier chunks there. They don't bypass as easy.
And so there we're getting a good look. We've seen this a number of times, that sort of leathery strip there. I believe that's some algae, probably some brown algae that has drifted from shallow water and got hung up here on the bottom. Apparently there was a small yellow fish just to the right of the sponge. I didn't notice it. I don't know if anybody else did. You can see that hermit crab is still there. He's right at the top right side. Okay. Oh, and there's an octopus. There's a nice little view to see.
All right.
So let's see.
Back here on the East it's almost Octopus Friday back here on the East Coast.
Octopus Friday.
Could we get the lasers on?
Casey about that.
Yep, she's here and just noted that in New Zealand it is Octopus Friday, and we're closer to New Zealand than to you, so this counts.
Well, there we go. We zoomed out. We can see the lasers now.
There's the fish.
10 centimeters apart for give you a sense of scale.
That's a really small octopus and a small fish.
That fish almost looks like a goby, and this would be a very deep, it's very deep for a goby, but that's what it sure looks like. There are mesophotic gobies that have recently been found in the Caribbean and a few other places. I'm sure it's very small. It looks like it's only a centimeter and a half, 2 centimeters long.
Yep.
But, I guess it's a goby, and we'll never figure out what it is because you have to look at things like the head pores and the branching on the pelvic fins and things like that.
Yeah, that's a little bit too small. Yeah, why don't we instead get a good look at that octopus and see, as maybe our last biological observation, if there's any information we can glean from it. Slipped away into the night. You see it? Oh, he's still. Oh, yeah, he's still there. Annie is pointing out to me that is still on the screen. It's just to the about 11 p.m. from the left laser dot. He's a little guy. So, is this our first mollusk? I don't actually remember. So the phylum Mollusca is the phylum that includes the clams and the snails and some other things that hopefully we'll see later in the cruise that are very interesting, but then also the whole group Cephalopoda, which includes your squid and your cuttlefish and the octopus. And here you can see the octopus contracting what's called the mantle. The mantle has gills in it, so it's pulling water in across those gills, and then it can pass the water out, and it's got a small funnel in the front of that mantle so that it could funnel the water as it squeezes it into the funnel so that it jets away very quickly. It's got very well developed eyes, very complex eyes. Octopus are one of the mollusks that have completely lost their shell. Their cousins, we were all talking about, hey, maybe we'll see a nautilus today. So nautilus is another kind of cephalopod. You might recognize them. They have lots of arms that have suckers on them, but they actually live in a shell that they secrete and carry with them. And then the cuttlefish have a small shell inside them. And the squid, it's reduced to pretty much of a plate and not a shell. But all of the other cephalopods that I talked about use the shell for buoyancy, so they can adjust the gas that's in the shell, and so they don't have to expend energy to remain up in the water, whereas the octopus is adapted to be benthic. It crawls around on the bottom. There are a few specialized octopus that spend quite a bit of time in the water, but most of them are crawling around the bottom. They use these arms, and they don't have the shells that they can squeeze into small spaces, and we're looking at all these holes in the bottom that can stick their arms in there, and the mouth would be underneath and surrounded by those arms. It can kind of force that up, and it's got a sharp beak-like structure that it can use to, bite things off. or pull it out with its arms.
And so what would an octopus like this be biting and pulling on?
It could be various kinds of crustaceans, so crabs,
Shrimp we saw earlier.
Yep,
Yeah.
if they were to find clams, for example, they could feed on those. It may be fish. I mean, I think anything that it could get a hold of. There may be some that have a specialist diet. Tim Shank from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution is joining us, is noting in our chat room that this octopus has highly prominent eyebrows. And he says that if you see how rapidly it's moving that mantle in and out, it's an indication of respiration rate, right? It's like if you were jogging, you start to breathe more heavily. And so this has to bring more water that's carrying the oxygen in and out of that mantle. So he's saying that relative to the deep sea octopus we're seeing, this one is respiring much more quickly, probably because it's in much warmer water.
Right.
Very nice view. And there he goes.
Well, just going to go find his
or
hole.
she. I do not know if it's a he or a she.
Yeah, he moves pretty fast when he wants to. Yeah.
Thanks, Tim, for that observation. We are at 234 meters depth. It's approximately 19.78 degrees Celsius down here, and we're diving just about 6 kilometers off the southeastern shore of Tuatila and the American Samoa, and we're within the boundaries of the sanctuary. And I wanted to note, we haven't actually collected anything, but we did have a permit to collect here from the National Marine Sanctuary of American Samoa. I believe the permit is also covering our, allowing us to operate in the within the zone. That coral is something new. If we're not actually recovering, that purple thing is different from anything we saw. It just went off the bottom right of the screen. Okay, no problem. No problem.
There we go.
Yep, understood. I was looking away, and that's what happens. Great, so this is another sea fan, but it's a different species than we've seen before. It's probably in what's called the family Plexauridae. They're extremely diverse, lots of genera and species, and very hard to identify without actually having a piece and looking at some of the microskeletal images. Thank you, pilot.
Great. Yeah, so NOAA's had we've had a lot of cruises operating here out of American Samoa in this area. We're doing lots of benthic habitat mapping and creating some very nice products that'll inform the habitat and also hazards in this area. So all of these data are publicly available, and we encourage scientists out there to make use, of course, of the video we're looking at, but also keep in mind that we're making multi-beam bathymetry and backscatter and water column sonars and all those other data sets available freely open to you, so take advantage of it.
And for the general public, all the images and the video that you're seeing, or a good sampling of them, are available on NOAA's website. If you just Google search Okeanos Explorer, or you may already be there, have made the link to watch the video that you're watching, but if you're on YouTube, you can go to the Okeanos Explorer website, and there will be lots of highlight videos. There will be images that you're free to download and use as your computer backdrop if you want, or any such use. It's all public access. There's a number of background information, stories, blogs. It's just really rich with information. You can learn an awful lot, not just the cruise that we're starting now, but past expeditions. They're all archived there. And so, unfortunately, we have to conclude our short dive today. We're all really excited that we were able to get into the water, given all the constraints and all the work that the ship's crew had to do this past week in port to be able to get us out here in the first place. But it's a good start.
Yeah, it was great. It was a great first dive.
We've got 3 more weeks coming up, so I hope you'll all be tuning in. 2 things to let you know. For the scientists, we are going to have our post-dive call and pre-dive planning call for the next dive just a couple of minutes.
Say 5 minutes?
5 minutes. And then for everybody, the scientists and those of you on shore, we're now moving north into a more remote part of the Pacific. Well, I wouldn't say that this is not remote, but we are very close to American Samoa. But we're moving away from any islands, and it's going to take us 2 days to get there. So there won't be a dive on Friday. There won't be a dive on Saturday, but we will be diving on Sunday by the time we get up there. So please do tune in again, and thank you to all the scientists who got on the phone, who got in the chat room and helped us out.
Great, yeah, and then we'll have 3 dives in a row once we do get up there. So,
that's right.
So stay tuned.
And some pretty exciting stuff up in the Cook Islands.
Yeah, the Maniki Plateau. So it'll be great.
I think there'll be some fascinating geology and biology.
This is Dr. Tatsi.
Perfect.
On behalf of the National Marine Sanctuary of American Samoa, I just want to say, Fatih Lava, thank you for your work for the dive today. I think we have some information that will be very useful for us in the future, especially our efforts to share data with our stakeholders and people of American Samoa. So we wish you well, safe diving for the remaining of your mission, and we look forward to work with you in the future. Thank you very much.
Talofa Tuatasi, thank you so much. I'm really glad we were able to get down here today and share these videos with you.
Yes, thanks for your hospitality while we were in port. It was great.
All right. Take care. We're signing off.
All right. Thank you, guys. So for scientists who can help us out on the post-dive call and pre-dive planning, give us 4 more minutes. That looks like it would be at 1/2 the hour.
Video, this is survey. Can you please disconnect the telecon from the live video feed, but leave it connected to the ship? Because we will be using it shortly and we'll be back in the control room then, but we just don't need it going out over the live video feed. Folks that are on the line, we're going to start the dive planning call in just a few minutes. If you want to tune in to video feed 3, that is where we will have the next multi-beam set pulled up.